Thank you everyone for attending. I hope you're having a enjoyable day here at Project Controls Expo. It's almost over, so I hope you've all had a good time. Now, before I start, I think I've heard a few people mention to me that they're going to attend this talk hoping I was talking about another tool that I'm involved in, which I'm not. So the presentation's about schedule and cost risk analysis, so I hope that there's no confusion there. All right, so the topic for today is improving cost and schedule risk maturity using modern quantitative risk analysis tools. Quite a mouthful, but please bear with me and we'll proceed. A little bit about myself, for those who may not know who I am. I'm a civil engineer by background, have been involved in planning and scheduling for the better part of almost 2 decades. I do work as an independent consultant in Sydney, and I like to specialise in a few little areas around project controls, which is schedule risk analyses and linear scheduling and a few other things. But here I'm representing Saffron, and I'll tell you a little bit more about Saffron in the next few slides. So what I hope you may walk away with from this presentation is an understanding about what is integrated cost and schedule risk analysis, why it's probably important on the projects that you're involved in, what are the benefits of having an integrated approach, which we'll get to towards the end of the presentation, but rather than doing, I guess, a piecemeal approach, how your own organisations or the projects that you're involved in may get started with it. And obviously there's going to be a little bit in there about why Saffron as a tool that lets you do this is perhaps a little bit different to some of the other tools, and in particular why it may be better than existing or legacy tools that you may also have. So who is Saffron? Just as some background. Saffron's been around for about 20 years, producing primarily planning and scheduling software that's used, and project control software, mainly used in Europe, but is now starting to be used in other countries around the world. So, and certainly has been used on a lot of projects ranging from small scale, typical small buildings, right up to the mega multi-billion-dollar oil platform type of projects. And that's all they do. So Saffron specialises in project control software only. There's a few quotes there on the left-hand side that may help you. So they have 2 primary products. One is called Saffron Project. Think of it as an alternative to your Primavera type of suite of scheduling systems. It's capable of producing very similar type of outputs. And the second product, which is a newer product, is called Saffron Risk. And I guess the key thing to explain about Saffron Risk is it's actually been developed by the same team who developed a tool called PERTmaster. So if any of you have been involved in doing project risk analysis before, you may have used either PERTmaster or its current name, which is Primavera Risk Analysis. So the same team of people who put that together were asked to put together Saffron Risk. So hopefully you'll see that in the presentation today there's a lot of things that were learnt, a lot of things that have been improved upon, and certainly over the 15 years since PERTmaster's been written, a lot has changed in the industry as well. Okay, so just to ask the question of why even bother with project risk analysis, right? So there's a number of reasons why you may want to do project risk analysis. The first is perhaps to produce a more realistic set of forecasts for your costs and your time. When will the project really finish? Like, we all have a good understanding of what a base estimate or a base schedule might be, but we also know that things change. A plan that is correct from start to end is, I've never seen it happen. So we all know things will change, and using a project risk analysis capability helps you put a bit more realism into that. Another reason is you may want to understand, well, based on the potential risks, which are the ones that are really driving those results, right? What is the things that is driving the cost and driving the completion date of our project? And from that, you can then say, are our assumptions correct? Are what we're expecting around our cost forecasts and our time forecasts correct? Have we got our production rates wrong? Have we got our methodology wrong? Based on the risks, is there a different way we can do things? And then the last reason you may want to do a project risk analysis is to inform or to facilitate your contingency estimates. So you may turn around and say, look, base estimate, our base schedule is this long, but based on the risks that we believe may occur, we need a contingency value of this amount. So that may be another reason why you use project risk analysis. Please feel free to jump in with questions if you have, or we'll save them to the end. So we're talking, the topic is about maturity of project risk analysis. So I'm going to be basing most of these presentations, actually, there's a little booklet I've got in my hand here that's called The Journey Map to Project Risk Analysis. It's been developed together with Saffron and a guy called Dr. David Hewlett. You may or may not have heard his name. He's considered as one of the industry leading experts on schedule and project risk analysis. Certainly he's very active in project controls forums such as the AAC in America. But he's produced this booklet here in my hand, and if you want a copy of it, there's the Saffron stand out in the exhibition space. You're more than welcome to come and grab a copy of the same document, or it's available from a website to download as well. So Dr. Hewlett came up with this maturity journey map that he said, essentially there's 6 levels of project risk level maturity. And there's different ways to describe each of these levels, which I'll talk through. And I suppose as an audience, the question to ask yourselves is, where are we on this journey map, and where do we want to be? Like any other maturity model, it's all about assessing where you are, what are the gaps to get to where you want to be, and figuring out, well, what are the systems, tools and processes that we can do to get there. Okay, so level 0, and I'm going to make a broad assumption to say that I don't think any of you in the room are operating at this level because you're here at this event, right? But essentially level 0 is no awareness of risk analysis at the project level, right? You basically say what we produce as our base estimate is it, that's it. And you may not be very well prepared to deal with it. You may hear comments like the 2 quotes on the bottom of the page there. This project's different. That won't happen on this project. We know how to deal with it, right? What we've done is correct. It's not going to change. So that's basically a sort of, to put it bluntly, is a level of ignorance, right? And as I said, this is at the bottom of that maturity model where you're basically saying, there's no need to worry about it. A level 1 awareness is classified as a basic risk awareness. So some of the characteristics you'll see about a level 1 is there's no systematic approach to risk analysis. It's kind of ad hoc. You may have pockets of people doing bits and pieces. There might be one champion in your organisation who is trying to do the right thing or trying to get this implemented, but is not, very successful in doing that. You may have, a basic level of uncertainty. You might say, look, we put this schedule together and we based it on this, but, we know it could be better or it could be worse. We know that the costs might go up or down, but you don't really take a systematic approach to analysing that. It's basically like a back of an envelope type of guesstimation, I guess. So level 1 is a basic risk awareness level. You're thinking about it, but you're perhaps not, really using the right processes or systems to formalise it. Level 2 is where you might be using what's called a qualitative risk analysis. So just what does qualitative mean? And there's one of those probability impact diagrams on the left-hand side there. So qualitative is when you're using descriptive words, high probability, low probability, high impact, low impact. What that means is you're actually working with sort of ranges. There's no fixed value of what the risks might be or what the probability and impacts might be. The problem you've got with this method is, it's a bit touchy-feely. It's a very subjective matter, and what you usually end up with if you do this type of process, as well as the PID diagrams, is just a risk register, right? And the risk register may contain some elements of some tangible quantities of costs and schedule durations, but it's still essentially just a register, right? You've not done the real number crunching Level 3 is where we're starting to get into a basic quantitative risk analysis. I get the feeling that this is the level that a lot of risk analysis is done at. Okay, so just to explain this a little bit more, you may be using your project schedule or your cost estimate and running a basic Monte Carlo type of analysis on it. So what I mean by basic Monte Carlo analysis, you're basically doing a 3-point spread against your line items. So you have a cost estimate with a base cost. You're saying what's the minimum cost and what's the minimum most likely or maximum cost. With a schedule, you may be running down the list of activities in a schedule, and similar thing, what is the minimum duration, what is the maximum duration, right? You may be doing this using interviews, workshops. You may have past performance type of records to use this information. But when you churn this information through, you come out with the histogram, distribution histogram, like the one that's shown on the left. Lets you do things like, what is my confidence? What is the date of a specified confidence level? And certainly you can't get that type of thing from the qualitative level previously, but now that you're putting some numbers against the schedule and running it through the numerical analyses, you can start getting all these quantified results. So I suspect this is where a few people are operating at, this sort of level of analysis. So you're on the right steps. This is a good starting point. So from here onwards is really where we step into, I guess, certainly what Dr. Hewlett, in his booklet here, talks about being a modern risk analysis approach. Now this little diagram here, what's a modern risk analysis approach? Some of you who are active on various forums for risk and etc. There's a bit of a cultural shift from risk management 1 to risk management 2 is this term that gets used. It's saying, let's move away from all the qualitative and get more into quantitative analysis, right? Let's get into a lot more about scenario, what if. We're running a lot more models. I mean, the technology is significantly better now than it was, say, 10 or 15 years ago, where it was difficult to do that type of thing. These days, we're a lot more about doing these what-if analyses, right? Because we know things change and things change very dramatically. So that's what modern risk analysis starts allowing you to do. So jumping into what we might call level 4 on that maturity model. I'm going to race through this presentation, by the way. Modern quantitative schedule risk analyses. The same applies. So what we're doing here is, rather than doing the 3-point distribution against individual tasks, right? And I'll tell you, there's a big problem with doing that. When you start saying what is the minimum and maximum of a task duration, what you're not asking is why. Right? Why is it that duration? Why is it that minimum? Why is it that maximum? Okay, so when we start talking about this modern approach, what we get back to is what is called the root cause. What is the reason for that minimum and maximum? We have to specify a reason, right? And it could be things like, it could be production rates, it could be design errors, it could be anything, right? But the idea is you have to relate those values that you're using back to a root cause. Okay? And what that then means is the probability of the risk then defines what type of risk. So you may have heard of terms in the past like estimate uncertainty or duration uncertainty. What that's basically saying is we know that the duration of a task or a cost is going to vary, but we don't know by how much, so we put a range of minimum and maximum. That's actually 100% probability. Right? What we're saying is we know it will vary, as opposed to the other term that sometimes gets used, which is called a discrete risk. Right? So a discrete risk is a probability that's less than 100%. So it may happen. Right? You might hear the term, it may happen, and therefore it has a probability of 30% or whatever the number is. So when we start using the root cause model, we have to always think about 100% probability means we know something is variable. What we can do when we start using this root cause method is start saying, well, activities may be affected by multiple risks, and risks may affect multiple activities. right? So going back to my example of when we say the minimum and maximum of a duration of activity duration, if we don't ask why, there's only one reason, because you've just put those numbers in. But now we can actually start saying, well, the reason for that particular uncertainty is because of reason A, reason B, reason C. So what you see on the right-hand side there, if this has got a pointer, I assume. Okay, it hasn't got a pointer. But if you look at the right-hand side on the bottom of the diagram, what it's basically saying to you there is there are 3 risks that may affect one task. And when you aggregate those 3 separate risks, that's the end result that you get at an individual activity level. So we can actually go back to saying the reason for why there's a minimum and a maximum duration is because of these 3 separate items, right? Now, we may apply that sort of level, that sort of risk impacting at a summary level, so it may affect a whole series of activities, or it may impact just one activity. Certainly in the past, a lot of schedule risk analysis has been done on what's called a summary schedule. So you may say, you know, we've got a 10,000 line item schedule, but we've summarised it to 200 lines and run a risk analysis. That's partially been driven by the technology. You know, it just took too long to work with 10,000 lines. But again, I say it again, the technology has moved on. You know, 10,000 line items in a schedule now, the software can do that just as easily as 100 lines. One of the other benefits of getting back to this root cause method is this concept that's called the risk driver approach. So what the risk driver approach basically says, because we're able to trace everything back to root causes, we can also understand how much each root cause affects the result. And I'll show you that in a separate screen, but what that actually lets you do is start ranking and prioritising your risks. Okay, so there's a, what I like to say is, as a show of hands, who uses tornado graphs in their risk analyses? Okay, it's a few show of hands. Okay, so what tornado graphs are generally used for is to present a ranking, right? What a tornado graph is actually showing you is a measure of correlation, right? It says when we ran an analysis, a particular item was correlated 80% of the time with the end result, right? And there's an expression that often gets used, correlation is not causation, right? Just because something is correlated, it may not be the thing that's causing the end result. And when you do schedule risk analysis, that becomes a lot more prevalent than doing cost risk analysis. So you might do a schedule risk analysis and you might find that it's an item on your tornado graph is 53% correlated. Well, it may not be the driving reason. It just happens to be that in 53% of the times it was longer. And there's a second problem with using tornado graphs, which is how do you go to your senior executives, your managers, your stakeholders and say 53% correlated, right? That's not something that they can tangibly understand, right? If you can go to them and say, this risk is causing X thousands of dollars or X days to the end result, that's a tangible result. That's something that they'll be able to understand, right? And using this risk driver method actually lets you go back with that result, something that a tornado graph can't do, which I'll hopefully show you in the next slide. So just to talk a little bit about Saffron itself. So the way Saffron allows you to do that assigning risks to multiple schedules tasks is just a little animation on the screen here shows how it's done. So you have a set of schedule tasks going down the page and the risks going across the page. As you select, you basically say tick, 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 this risk affects these activities or these activities affected by these risks. And what you see on the right-hand side is the dynamic sort of mini analysis that says, how does my duration change based on the risks that are affected, or affecting rather? Does that make sense? It's a little bit different to perhaps how you may have been used to doing it, but I personally find this a very intuitive way of understanding, well, the reason why my Monte Carlo analysis is changing the duration is because of this. All right, so the next slide I just want to show you is what's called the automated ranking and prioritization. This is going to loop through, so I'll just talk you through. So what that risk driver method, the thing that lets you go back to having that tangible result, what it does is it takes your risk analyses, which is based on a series of root cause risks. What we then do is we run the analysis with all the risks turned on and we get a result. The software then takes one risk out of the analyses and runs it again to get a result, and we see what the difference is. And you can say, well, that root cause risk has saved this much days or saved this much dollars. You then turn that risk back on and you turn off the next risk. And you progressively do that through the full set of risks that you have in your model. And what that allows you to do is to say, well, when we turn one risk off, this is how much the result comes back, and which is therefore the one that has the greatest saving. So that's your number one risk. That's the thing that's causing the greatest amount of delay or the greatest cost to your analyses. And so Saffron actually automates that process. Just basically press one button, and what you see on the screen there is the actual process of it. Taking one risk out, putting it back in, taking the next risk out, putting it back in, seeing how the result varies. What that lets you do is, and it's a bit difficult to see because this looks like a tornado graph, but the horizontal axis is not percentage, it's not correlation, it's actually duration or dollars. It's that tangible result that says the number one risk is saving us 32 days. If we can manage that risk, then that's the improvement in the result that we'll see. Okay, so that's it's the risk by exclusion method that Dr. Hewlett claims to have invented, but I'm not quite sure if he has. So, we spoke about level 4. Now we're at level 5. You know, as the top of the pyramid, as they say. Level 5 is what is called the Advanced Integrated Cost and Schedule Risk Analysis. So up to now, I've been talking about purely just schedule risk analyses. The same principles apply to cost risk analyses. The difference is you don't use a schedule, you use a cost estimate. But at level 5, you actually start integrating the two together. Okay, so that's what that big orange box in the middle says, is that when you're working on a project, yes, you've got your schedule, yes, you've got your costs, but some costs are driven by schedule. We know that. If you think about overheads, if you think about staff, if you think about equipment or labour that's charged on a rate basis, they're dependent on time. So it's a time-dependent cost. So when you actually run an integrated cost and schedule risk analyses, you're actually able to produce what's called a scatter plot of results. So what the scatter plot basically does is it says, we've done a Monte Carlo analysis, and for every single Monte Carlo analysis, we have a cost and we have a time. And we draw that on the scatter plot there. But some elements of the cost are driven by the schedule. So what Saffron allows you to do is actually load in a cost estimate and link elements of the cost estimate to the schedule duration. And that schedule duration can be driven by the schedule risks as well. So it's not just purely dependent on whatever your, what's called the deterministic schedule might have. The benefit of using this type of approach is you're modelling, you know, a more realistic behaviour. Certainly I know a lot of schedule risk and a lot of cost risk is done in isolation to each other, but the reality is costs are dependent on time. Time is money is the expression that we all like to use. So that's and we can only achieve that if we use an analysis that actually links the schedule and the schedule risks to the costs and their cost risks. So that's what the scatter plot there is showing you, is of the 1,000 results, how many fell within a particular range, and the different colouring is the different banding and what's called a joint confidence level. So that's if you can start producing joint confidence levels, you're already operating at a level 5. All right, so as I said, I was going to be finishing fairly quickly, so I'm not sure how much time I had, but anyway. So I've ignored the first few levels of the maturity model because I would hope that you're either beyond that or very quickly going to get away from that. based on those initial, what do we use project risk analysis for? Well, a level 3, does it produce us more realistic forecasts? Maybe, right? It might. It depends on how robust your basic level of analysis is. Can it give you the identifying risks, expectations, focus measures? No, it just cannot, right? It will not give you what is my driving risk when all I've done is just put 3-point spreads against my cost, because you don't have a reason for that spread. You haven't got your root cause analyses. Level 4, can it do all those things? Potentially, right? You could, especially if you have got a very robust method of doing an independent cost analysis and an independent schedule analysis and pulling it all together, right? But level 5 is where you start putting it all together. And that's where I guess the point of this presentation is to say, when you start getting to that level of maturity is where you start having some confidence that you're able to achieve those 4 outcomes. All right, just to continue the promotional part of the presentation. So Saffron, if you're familiar with using other tools in the marketplace, Saffron's still fairly new in the risk analysis space, so they have an active development roadmap. They're actually listening to what their users want, listening to what the market needs, and responding to that, unlike some other products that are out there. So this is a roadmap that they've produced out there. The second dot point there includes scripting options. That's actually just been released. So what that allows you to do is you can actually, your risk model can change depending on the results that it sees. So as an example, you can say, if a risk occurs, I want you to break a relationship in the schedule. Or if a risk occurs, extend the cost by this much. So it's actually a bit more of a dynamic model, because the analogy I like to draw is, in reality on a project, if a risk eventuates, you don't just sit there with your arms crossed going, well, that's what our schedule says, right? You actually take some measures, you take some mitigation measures to reduce the impact of that particular risk event. So we can now start modelling that in our risk analyses as well. There is an online web-based risk registry intended to come out soon, because having that risk register, or at least being able to identify risks before you jump into the quantitative analysis, is an important part of the process. And as I mentioned, an active development team who are very open to hear suggestions and feedback. So you're all welcome to visit the Saffron website, where you can download this in PDF format if you want, or you can also download a 30-day trial of the software that lets you do this risk analysis. You're more than welcome to contact me at my email address there to also ask more questions, or if you need a demonstration or anything further. And that's actually the end of my presentation. So I think am I well ahead of time? 5 minutes, okay. So if there are any questions, I believe we have a microphone that can be used to make sure you're all heard. So if you do have any questions, please raise your hand. A couple here, yep.
Thank you. So talking about identifying the root causes of the risks and then using that for analysis, in terms of software to do that, obviously you're talking about your own product there, presumably. Is there any commercial off-the-shelf software products that can do that level 4, level 5 stuff?
So Saffron Risk, all the screenshots that I showed you in, is the quantitative risk analysis tool. That is the tool that does the Monte Carlo. So that's, if you want that integrated cost and schedule, the Saffron Risk is the tool that will do that. What Saffron Risk doesn't have is that risk registering capability that lets you, when you're working on a project, you may sit down and have risk workshops, or you may speak to the experts and say, what are the key risks that may affect this schedule or cost, and you table that into a risk register. That's the piece that Saffron doesn't have at the moment. So it will come along, but whenever I've been asked to go in and do a risk analysis, I always start with the risk register as a starting point to sort of say, well, which of these are actually tangible risks that can be modelled and which are ones that are just fluffy, feel-good type of things, and you would then filter that list. So I'm not sure if I answered that question. And
if I could do a second one. We've been hearing today about the interdependencies of risks.
Yep.
I'm not sure if I picked it up, but does the Saffron Risk allow you
Yes.
to flag if this then this?
If this then so.
One risk is going to then change the. If one risk eventuates, the next risk is going to have a different.
Yes, so that's the So the second dot point there, the scripting options, lets you do that. So that's now available in Saffron Risk. So you can actually build your own custom scripts into the model that lets you do. That's one of the triggers that says if the risk impact is a value that you set, then do the following actions. And you can modify the schedule, you can modify the cost, you can modify the risks based on a trigger being triggered. Yep.
Thank you.
There was a question here.
Hi. Assuming you've got a base knowledge of risk, how easy is this software to use?
So the software is actually fairly straightforward.
Okay.
Unlike some of the older legacy tools where you kind of had to know, well, which is the menu I need to click on and what does this button do? And I don't know if I've got a slide that actually shows, okay, if I just stop at this one, see those tabs across the top there? That's essentially the workflow. You start from the left, the middle one that's highlighted in red is your go button. You press, everything on the left is the inputs, everything on the right is the outputs. And you basically, it's a very straightforward user interface, but that's not to make it mean it's simple either. The model can be as complex as you, the user, want it to be. So I would say ease of use, this is hands down significantly better than some of the other, especially some of the older tools out there.
Okay, and if training is required, how is it courses, is it manuals?
Well, so at the moment, if you wanted training, we could arrange that as part of your, I guess, implementation. There are some videos online through Saffron themselves. They're not really tutorials types. I would suspect, based on your level of risk analysis knowledge, it's like a 2-day training course, and that 2 days will mostly be about how do I do this, what does this button do, how do I import in a schedule, load it up, run analysis, what does this result mean? It's not something you need to spend days and days and days just figuring out how to use. It's a very straightforward tool.
Thank you.
No problem.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. One question, in each, I guess, risk activity, is there a way to input like metadata? Seeming like we have, let's say, a joint venture and you want to make sure each risk is, some might be common, some might be depending on the joint venture contractor, or let's say you want to divide it by like discipline or something like that. Does Saffron have that sort of way to filter out certain ways so we could analyze it in a certain way?
In terms of having a list that then lets you do all that filtering, at the moment the answer is no, but this risk registering capability will take care of that. In terms of running an analysis where you might say, well, we have 3 risks, one for each JV partner. Let's do an analysis with just one risk to understand the effect. It's a very straightforward button of basically ticking. Run the analysis with this risk turned on or off. Yep. There's a toggle box. It's very easy to use.
But if like the number of risks are, let's say, like 1,000 or 1,500 or something like that.
That's an impressive model.
Yeah, for keeping that would be hard. So we be able to script that portion to automate, if that's possible? Or
Yeah, I'm sure you could actually. The scripting function's very new. It's only been released about 2 weeks ago, so I haven't had a good chance to dive into it. But yes, the answer is yes, because I know list of risks is one of the variables that you can put into that script.
thank you.
No problem. Any further questions? Oh, one on the side.
Just really, yeah, two technical questions.
Two technical questions.
Yeah, will it do weather modelling
Yes.
with risk drivers working as well?
Yes.
And can you correlate the risk drivers? So heated market relates to
Yes.
lack of skills plus
Yes.
increased pay.
So,
well done.
well, okay, let me just elaborate on that, the second bit about correlation. If you're familiar with Primavera risk analysis, correlation is a real pain in the arse, to be polite. It's very difficult to implement correlation. So Saffron, because they took that knowledge of having developed that tool, have turned it into a basic matrix where you have all the risks in a matrix and you just say this risk is correlated to that risk at a value of 1. Or this schedule impact is correlated to that risk, and then there's a great little button that actually says these values that you've mapped can't work because mathematically it won't work, and it actually fixes that for you. Just press a button. And then, you, like when you're running an analysis, it's a tick box that says include or exclude correlation. So you'll save days of effort just on that alone. Okay, thank you all for attending, and I hope you have, well, there's only one more session I think left, so hope you enjoy the rest of the day.